The objective here is to study port 3389. It's the remote display protocol port. And so here we're using grc.com as our resource, and studying port numbers are kind of hard. I tried to do these like number associations. I did find this interesting one. So in 1989 in Tiananmen Square, 1989, there's a unveiling of the statue called the Goddess of Democracy. And how tall is that statue? Well, 33 feet. So a 33-foot tall statue is unveiled in 1989 in Tiananmen Square. And you know what else starts with a T? Terminal server. So this port is used by Microsoft's terminal server, or terminal services, which were renamed to Remote Desktop for their appearance in Windows XP. You might see this port named MS-RDP, as in MS for Microsoft and RDP for Remote Desktop Protocol. So with their introduction of Windows XP, Microsoft renamed their original terminal server technology, which they purchased from Citrix years before, to the more user-friendly Remote Desktop. Terminal server Remote Desktop allows a remote client to remotely log on to a properly equipped and enabled machine, and to then display a full graphical desktop from that remote machine. So a good question is, what can you do with this port? Well, display another computer's GUI, which is pretty fancy. Steve Gibson says in the article here, it's all very cool and it works surprisingly well for a remotely connected graphical user interface, but you can imagine the security implications. Since everyone knows that Remote Desktop runs over TCP port 3389, worldwide internet scans for this port are becoming more common. From a strict security standpoint, regardless of the username and strength of the passwords available on the hosting machines, anyone who is deliberately leaving port 3389 wide open and available to the entire internet is courting extreme danger. And how spooky would that be if somebody just started moving your mouse around and clicking on things and you're just sitting there watching? So a silly question, should you leave this port open? No, not if you don't plan on using it. So in his third paragraph, he reminds us that all ports have internet servers and services running behind them, and even if it's on a machine in your home, the same risk and exploitation of internet vulnerabilities that you hear and read about daily becomes your liability when you deliberately open and expose ports to the internet. So that's why his website here called Shields Up will scan for you and tell you if you have ports that you shouldn't have open. He continues, while it could be argued that no one would be able to guess a sufficiently bizarre username and password, and while choosing strange names and secure passwords for publicly exposed services is always important, that's not the only security risk. And I really like his use of the word bizarre here, so I asked the question, what should you make bizarre? Well, Microsoft's track record of publicly exposed, remotely exploitable server vulnerabilities is so bad that it's probably true that they have never offered a server or service in which multiple security vulnerabilities were not eventually discovered and often exploited. That being the case, you do not want to be running an exposed remote desktop server on the day when the community of malicious internet hackers discovers a means to overflow an unchecked buffer or otherwise circumvent your security and exploit the faith you have implicitly placed in Microsoft security. So what can you do? Don't have this port exposed globally. If you must be able to access your system from anywhere on the internet from an IP address, there's nothing you can do to hide the port. You'd have no way to restrict who can see port 3389 on your system if you need to be able to see it from any IP. But if, as the case for many people, you only need to access your system from one or a few locations having fixed IPs or fixed ranges of IPs, many free or inexpensive desktop firewall products can be used to restrict the IPs from which traffic to and from your system's port may flow. So in this way, you can continue to have unfettered access to your remote system from specific locations by IP address, while no one else who may be scanning the internet will find any opportunity for potential exploitation. So he gives us a better solution. Good to know, probably good to know if you're going to take a test. Remembering port numbers has always been challenging to me without practice or reading like blogs like this. So just remember the picture of the perfect remote here. If you want a perfect remote port on your machine, make sure to put the IP address you want to connect remotely from in your firewall rules, and you will have that perfect remote.